Dan, welcome. Nice to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us, taking time out your busy schedule. Appreciate it. So look, first episode, I thought I'd give you a little introduction, the modern CRO. I'm really pleased to say that this is the first episode we're doing in person as well, which is amazing. My name's Simon Gregory and I'm the go-to-market director for Primis Talent, and I'll be your host for these series of episodes. I guess before we dive into the conversation and I guess the kind of pod and interview today, I think it's important to give a bit of context. So over the 15 years that I've worked in the space, I've met some absolutely incredible people, brilliant minds, and I felt like the best insights don't always appear on LinkedIn or articles or stuff you read out in the publicly facing domain. And some of the best insights and real conversations, chats that are done potentially in podcast studios, right? So I wanted to give a platform based on some of those findings for brilliant people like Dan to be able to tell a little bit about their story, which is why we kind of formed Primis Presents. So we've gone through a series of episodes. If you haven't checked them before, we did more of an EMEA sort of revenue leaders, and we called it Cracking the EMEA Revenue Code. Got some great people that talked about some of their learnings, but I feel privileged really to be sort of connected across the space and giving back a little bit to the community. And really wanted to kind of bring that to light over the next sort of 5 episodes where we're going to be doing the modern CRO. So every business, every market and every team has its own different challenges and opportunities. There's not one size fits all. I think that's really clear. Otherwise, everybody would be scaling at the pace of, we talk about Cursor and Lovable, right? But there's obviously things that need to be worked out. I'm joined by Dan here. If you don't know Dan, you should do, really. But Dan's I'm sure extremely humble, but has an incredible background from Appboy, then Braze, Salesforce, and now the president of Luminance, which is a super exciting company. I believe at Braze, you took them from Series B to an 8 billion IPO, forgive me. So knows what he's talking about. Let's say that. He's worked across multiple regions, global positions, scaled businesses, and is really going to, I'm sure, bring a lot of incredible value to the conversation today. I'm really looking to kind of dive into that. So I know I've given you a little bit of an intro there, but for those that don't know of you yet, Dan, just tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your career and story.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Simon. It's great to be here and great to be in person in the studio rather than doing this stuff on Zoom. I think we've all had enough of that. So I'm, in a nutshell, I am a 30-year enterprise technology commercial leader, like in a nutshell, really. And that has spanned manufacturing tech, supply chain, CRM, social media, marketing communication, AI brand messaging, and now legal AI. I've seen quite a few changes in that time. If I rattle off a few things like on-premise to SaaS, people used to install technology from disks on hardware. It's quite nice. When people used to buy the technology, you literally ship them a box of disks. I quite like that. But also physical to digital, that's the whole e-commerce thing, web to mobile, static to streaming data, and now, of course, agentic kind of revolution that we're in. And I suppose the thing which I guess happens with that sort of tenure is you start to see the similarities of all of it. So a lot of this feels very familiar to me. I'm particularly enjoying this challenge or this phase of my work in kind of agentic automation, because I started my career as a manufacturing engineer. I was actually in a procurement team buying steel for pneumatics and hydraulics, so train buffers and JCB rams. But I started my career in automation, and now here I am back in automation again. So it's kind of coming full circle.
Do you have any sort of key milestones in your career? And if so, what are they? And why?
Yeah, so I suppose somebody said to me a while back, it's quite good to get multiple cultures on your resume. And I had an opportunity in 2002 to move to the States. It was the headquarters of the business I worked in. It was based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which was a bit random, but somebody had told me that's a good idea. And so at the time I jumped at that. And what that did was I lived in the States for 7 years, and I've also worked for US-based companies for 28 years. So what that has meant is I really understand US culture, US DNA. My network over there is good. When I eventually moved back, company got bought and a bunch of other sort of changes that meant I changed my role. But what that meant was I could now be a UK-based commercial leader, the genuine experience of the US market. And we know that US tech is the kind of primary growth engine. That gave me an advantage. And I suppose then the second thing, which I will then I'm going to do 3. So the second thing was going to Salesforce, actually. And Salesforce, people used to say back then, and I went there in 2012, people would say you go to Salesforce to get your master's degree in SaaS. And I think that was kind of right. And you sort of turned up and they just had the playbooks and the operations before everybody else. And there's a lot of cultural things about that business that people talk about are not necessarily brilliant, but there's so much about it that really is. And it just sort of taught me to work on a different level. I remember turning up there for the first few weeks going, I can't keep up with this place. And then you learn to keep up with it, you know. And then the third thing was finding this company with a funny name, AppBoy, in late 2015, and which we renamed to Braze. And I was the first employee outside the US. And because of my experience at Salesforce and because of my experience in the US, they were willing to help me take on a global role, which became global CRO, which is unusual for a US-based tech company. So probably those 3.
Yeah. If we circle back just slightly, just about, you mentioned starting off almost as an engineer as well, because I think that's interesting, maybe worth just sort of understanding a bit better. I think that set yourself up that you truly and deeply understand the tech?
I wouldn't say I truly and deeply understand the tech. So I was one of those kids that really didn't know what they wanted to do. And in fact, I didn't really even want to really go to university because I just wasn't particularly academic. My father really was academic. He was like professor, dean of business, language and law at several universities around the UK. Maybe I was being a bit rebellious, but I just didn't find my groove with that. I ended up doing manufacturing systems engineering at university, and it was one of those vocational degrees where you get a year in industry, and it was just sort of practical, really. It wasn't really academic. I could see, okay, this stuff actually has some interface with the real world. Yeah. You know, I loved that year in industry. Like I said, the hydraulics and pneumatics, and that was where I sort of had my first taste of technology and systems as it related to, in this case, factories. Those those origins meant it wasn't so much that I became a sort of technical expert, but I did start to, I became curious about, does something work and how does it work? And I did also start to get a real, I don't know, I wouldn't say advocacy for automation. I thought this is great because obviously if you're dealing with manufacturing people, it is about automation, it's about quality control, it's about throughput, it's about managing, minimizing waste and so on. And as I've gone through my career, I've always seen elements of that have been appropriate at every step, and now massively so. So it's not so much understanding tech, it's understanding kind of what underpins it and what it's all there actually for.
How long was your journey at Braze from start to finish, time-wise?
7 years.
And how quickly into that journey did you realise you're onto something that was truly special?
So there's a phase that all those early stage startups go through, which is pretty chaotic. I think it's almost like a gung-ho attitude, and chaos is necessary to get businesses kicking and screaming out of kind of origin to something. It was pretty wild when I joined. And at the time, it was really only technical disruptors that were absorbing that particular tech. But that changed in 2017-18 when enterprises started to adopt it. And this was mobile messaging tech, and it changed because it wasn't just pizza delivery, on-demand food, gaming and dating and stuff like that, which were like the first apps. It suddenly moved to the enterprise, and the moment I remember was when Disney launched their streaming service, Disney Plus, to compete with Netflix, and of course people were going to look at that on their phones. That was launched in 2018, I think. When that happened, enterprises all suddenly tipped to be mobile first. Yeah. And our technology was already there and was kind of pulled along with that wave. So we sort of existed at a point in the future, and then everyone just sort of arrived at where we were. And that was when we sort of looked around and we thought, we've got momentum, but this is really happening now. And you could definitely feel the difference.
Could you feel the pull from the market?
Yeah.
That's so cool, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for the intro. Let's dive into the kind of the questions. So just in the topic around building the revenue engine, what separates SaaS companies that scale revenue predictably from those that grow fast but struggle to repeat it?
I think processes that, or lack of processes that ultimately are where a lot of businesses start. They tend to be volume activity-based approaches rather than quality-based approaches. Because the thing is about technology, and I think we're talking about sort of reasonable technology in hot markets for this question. Typically, the market that you're going to be in is going to be massive and you're going to be really small. Yeah. And it doesn't really matter if you've got 10, 50, 100 or 300 reps. That statement probably still rings true. So it becomes an exercise in resource utilizations. Now I'm back to manufacturing analogies again. But resource utilization, capacity planning, you really need your people. So, of course, you need to get good people, good talent. They need to be enabled and trained. They need to be motivated and all that kind of stuff. But they need to be really well utilized, and you have to do that with some kind of go-to-market structure. And I think the companies that get that sort of next level growth and sustain it are effective at being bold enough to start saying, this is where we're going to work and this is where we're not. In other words, they get good at saying no. But they also are, of course, scrappy and agile enough to be able to adapt and iterate. Because when you make bets on territories or qualification criteria, you're going to get that wrong and you need to tune it over time. But that's not the same as ignoring it and then going back to the way that you were before. So I think it's really having the belief and the faith of looking at other companies that have done it to say, yeah, we do need to work in a more structured, disciplined way, take that leap, stick with the plan. And ultimately, I've never seen, whenever a company's done that, I've never seen it not work.
Fail fast.
Yeah.
Okay. What are the early warning signs that a GTM model is breaking as a company scales?
So you'll hear reps will come into your office and they'll say, I'm working harder than ever, I'm less productive than ever. And it's probably because the sales team is getting pulled into account management CS work that is non-revenue generating. It's probably because they're working on calls and leads that are not particularly well qualified. Basically, they're just really, really busy and really, really active and not very productive. And so, the noises tend to come out of the woodwork pretty clearly.
Yeah, I think, I'm seeing it in the startup space. A lot of these roles have less definition nowadays. Definitely byproducts, I think, of AI. What can we automate? What can't we? How do people survive in that environment, right? How do reps kind of shine through in that?
So now this is a much bigger question then. So because of course need the you need the discipline. You need to have your people. You need to have your people fishing where there's fish. So that's the territories part, and it needs to be qualified because you don't want them spending time trying to catch every fish. It's like catch the ones you want to catch. Through that process, you also need leadership that gives a lot of confidence because typically these are quite young teams. They haven't done it before, and they want to feel like they're doing the right thing. And in order to it's always going to be hard work. So you need a team motivated to feel okay about the fact that it's hard work and it's not always going to work out. It's like sales teams really appreciate being given confidence. But there are also a whole bunch of other macro factors like the culture you're in, the enablement of that team. At some point in this discussion, we're probably going to be talking a lot about mentoring and coaching, which I think is so missed. But one of the things that makes me smile now and also makes me a little bit frustrated is, I remember my first year in sales. So I started my first job in 1996. I think my first year with a quota was 1998. And my quota was £1 million. That is what quotas for reps are now. So I'm like, where's the inflation?
It's like 5 million now.
It should be. It should be like 50 million now. And it was actually very simple. And I don't want to do the back in my day old man thing. But it was, here's the yellow pages, here's the car keys, there's your postcode, off you go.
Yeah.
It was so pure. There was no noise. There was no noise. There's so much noise now. There's so much tech, and the tech is being used so much as a substitute for good management and good leadership. And I think what it comes down to is really simple. A rep has a quota, and there's only so much time in a year. So they need to spend their time retiring that quota. I think and you see this in sort of performance sports teams, and we might talk about that as well, but really great companies and sales teams really instill that sort of sense of the finite nature of time. There's a T-shirt I've read once called "Sell Code or Get Out of the Way," and it's like the job of the business is to give as much time back to those functions as possible.
Yeah, 100%. So you said something there that resonated. You said about sometimes it would be good, sometimes it won't, right? I guess my question to you is, when you're speaking to these reps or incoming employees, I guess you would have the final interviews with them. How do you gauge that resilience? How do you test whether or not they will stay around, when everything is not so rosy? Have you got, ways that you do that?
Yeah, so there's three characteristics that I've sort of distilled down over the years that I want to look at or test with sales candidates, and they're intelligence, paranoia, and conscientiousness. And intelligence kind of speaks for itself. It's like you want to see evidence that they are smart, they've got qualifications, they've worked in different environments, they've been adaptable and picked up new concepts and so on. So let's just assume that's a given. Yeah. But really, I think the one we're talking about now is the paranoia part, and that's this sort of healthy, useful, productive anxiety. And what's quite funny is obviously good salespeople tend to be quite confident people. They may well be pretty competitive people anyway, but that's not really enough. The nice thing about sort of paranoia is there's a humility with it. So when you sort of sit down with somebody who is competitive, high achieving, kind of outgoing and so on, but you tell them, or you suggest them, or you find a way to suggest that they're perhaps not as great as they think they are. Their achievements are perhaps not as great. You start to talk about people that have their age that have maybe done more than they have, and you sort of see them sort of lean in a bit, and that, because you've now made them a bit worried. Like, what is it that other people are doing? Yeah. What am I missing? What could I be doing? And that kind of leaning in and, like, I'm a bit worried about that now. Like that is what you want your good salespeople to feel. Because in a commercial sense, what's my competitor doing? What are my kind of internal detractors doing? They're all conspiring against me. What am I missing? What haven't I done? That feeling in your gut is what makes a great salespeople. So if you can sort of find a way to tease that out, and if people exhibit that trait, then you're probably onto a good one.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've heard like the coachability, the intelligence. Paranoia isn't one I've had, and I've asked that question a lot. That's really interesting. I guess it's what gets you out of bed, doesn't it? It's like when you're looking yourself in the mirror. It's normal, and people try and not show it, but it's the humility around.
But you just said something else that I think is important there. That get out of bed in the morning. I think probably the most important value or principle behind anybody is their intrinsic commitment to do it.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't want to get up and do it, don't do it, because really no one can make you do it. If you say, I think I'm going to train for a marathon, and you wake up at 5 a.m, you got to want to get out of bed and do it. And literally, and it is like that in work. Like, if you want to invest in your career, if you want to learn, if you want to develop, if you want to make money, if you want to look after your family, or whatever you want to do, ultimately it only comes down to you and your willingness to get out of bed in the morning and do it.
So next topic is about building elite GTM teams. So when you think about the best teams you've built, what's made them high performing rather than just high activity?
So there was an amazing sort of reciprocal exchange at Braze between very young, progressive engineering minds that had come out of MIT and Harvard, and older, more experienced minds that had been through that had learned operational best practices at places like Salesforce. So the first thing is understanding that sort of reciprocity of skills. Like, just being older and more experienced is not enough. Everyone's got something to add, and you want that sort of chemistry of sort of diverse expertise. But the bit that really separates I think the great teams is probably two things. One is their ability to keep hiring and retaining more great talent, because it's kind of relentless. Like, when I think about the work that I'm doing now at Luminance, the journey at Braze, it was more an exercise in hiring and acquiring and developing talent than anything else. It was like I was permanently in recruiting for 7 years. Like, my weekly hiring calls were more important than the weekly revenue forecasting calls. It does, because you get the great people and everything kind of looks after itself. And so that's my other point, is that when you have these great chemistries, or this reciprocity of skills, and you also have great talent, the great talent also tends to attract more great talent. And that's kind of the point, is that growth is about scale. It's the very definition of scale. And so scale means doing more faster, and you can't do more faster unless people can independently do that. So I want to hire brilliant managers who can go and get more brilliant managers, who can get more brilliant people. Yeah. And you want the whole thing to cascade without you having to touch it, because having to touch it means it won't scale.
Very hard to do. Not many people do that well, but yeah, I totally agree. What separates good enterprise sellers from truly elite ones?
So enterprise selling is typically done by people that have already learned selling. So they know how to sell, they know the process, they know the science, they know a bit about the art, they can be competitive and so on. But enterprise selling is about many things, and in no particular order. Firstly, it's not about the technology anymore, because you're not selling to individuals, you're selling to a company, and a company is the political dynamic of the individuals, which means your product and your value proposition is probably going to get you in the door and get you so far, and then the real selling starts, which is the political dynamic of the group. And there will be agendas that work for and against you, and it will take a long time to unpick. But it's not going to get done unless you dive in and do it. So what's problematic about that is it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of commitment, and you really don't want to commit your time to something that's going to take 4 or 5 years to convert. So it becomes more tricky for territory definition. But the reality is that even though you don't wait 4 or 5 years, if you don't focus, you'll never get it at all. So it's a balancing act of territory management, of understanding where in the journey to purchase that enterprise is, sort of pacing effort through that journey over time, so that eventually you can line up, here are the businesses that I think are going to move this year, here are the ones next year, here are the ones after that, and pacing the effort between what the salespeople does, what the BD team do, what the marketing team do in nurturing, and kind of managing or spinning those plates concurrently. But it's also about really understanding that business, and it's definitely not something you can do behind a desk or in an office. And it's a very field-based role. Enterprise reps need to live in the buildings of their target accounts. But again, back to the territories things, because the territory is going to be wrong, and we still need reps to be delivering revenue, we need to be very good at monthly territory reviews to make sure we're kind of keeping live opportunities going, not consuming too much time when we need to focus, but enough so that we're not putting all our eggs in a few baskets. And I suppose the last thing is belief. So I always say that, I literally said this to the team this week. So I say to the team of salespeople, just imagine it's month 3 of the fiscal year and you've hit target and you're now in your multipliers for the rest of the year. Just imagine how good you are. You know, how you qualify, how you say no, pace of your language, you know, your confidence that you exude.
Yeah.
Enterprise selling, it's elephant hunting. You're not going to get as many chances to win deals. And they may well happen at the end of your fiscal year or the end of the client's fiscal year. So you've got to be patient. You've got to have belief. You may not have earned any commission checks all year. You've got mortgage payments and you've got kids at school, but you've got to behave in month 11 of the year when you haven't sold anything like you did if you were month 3 and you're already at target. And that takes a lot of internal resources to do that, especially if you're surrounded by more junior reps that are selling every month.
Yeah. They call that, there was like flow state, don't they? When you're sort of in the groove. And I think prospects, it's the old analogy, isn't it? The prospects can smell that if you're trying to force something down the throat almost.
It's real belief. And remember, and it's like you're there to solve your customers' problems. You're there to add value. None of this is about making businesses do what they don't want to do. But if you believe that you can add value and you can align that vision with the client's vision and successfully navigate the politics within the deadline, then you're off to the races.
Yeah. Okay, let's be a bit like reflective, I guess. Leadership and personal lessons, right? What habits or disciplines have had the biggest impact on your effectiveness as a CRO or president?
Yeah, so I think in one word, it'd be boundaries, or more words, kind of like the management, maintenance, respect of boundaries, mine and others. So there's a thing in performance sport where like really high performing sports people are very, very good at optimizing their rest. You know, because the efforts are massive and the rest is just so important. And I think high growth is like that as well. And I often say to people, I think, you know, maybe if you work for a business that's ticking along, 2% growth a year, whatever, then maybe you don't feel like this, you know. But high growth is difficult and it's demanding and it's fast and it will consume your time and you can basically always be doing it. So you could be doing this job every waking hour if you wanted to. And especially because, back to paranoia, if you're thinking, what is my competitor doing? Maybe they're outworking me. But performance requires clarity and focus and calmness and health and wellness and all those things. So boundaries is really important. And we're all doing this for a reason. We still have friends, we have families, we want to go to the gym. People just, I think, need to figure out a way, given that time is finite and the sand is running through the timer of the year, and you've got your quota that's tied to the year. So really the only thing that anyone has to do is get really, really effective at using their time. And it almost needs to be kind of like a maniacal obsession. Like, I want to make this 30-minute meeting 20 minutes if I can. So I've got 10 minutes to have a glass of water, just have a breathe, do a couple of emails, bang on to the next one. Really efficient. And I am a believer that done well, people can get more out of their day and still go home in time to go to the gym, be with their families, not check their emails in the evening and get a good night's sleep. But that's really hard. But I'm a believer that is better than trying to scale and run a business based on heroics. I think that might be necessary for certain periods of a company's existence or journey, but I think it it's a bit like being above the 8,000 meter zone on the mountain. If you're going to be in that zone, you need to realize you need to get out of it pretty quickly.
There's obviously a theme, isn't there, across a lot of the answers to the questions is time management, qualification, prioritization, like life, business.
Care and attention paid to that. One of the really fun things you can do as a sales manager is sit down with reps and say, can I have a look at your calendar? And it's a bit like looking at somebody super junior when they go on a hike. It's like, you don't need that, you don't need that. Like, take half that stuff out of your rucksack. Okay, now you're light enough to off you go. It's amazing how much time people waste. Back to my point about zero quota inflation over 30 years.
So, yeah, 100%. But just before we move on to, I mean, what are we now, like maybe 35 minutes or so, and we haven't talked about AI or agentic properly yet, so we'll get onto that. But just before we go on, like, you talked a little bit about high performance sport, and I think that's something that should be kind of dovetailed into the conversation. What do you personally feel like the kind of enduring model, binding ingredient, sort of secret sauce, if you will? Like, I know we spoke off camera about Alex Ferguson, like Pep Guardiola, the list could go on, David Brailsford, right? These guys, they just had something that hardly anybody else has had, which enabled them to just operate at a different level. Like, almost an impossible question to answer. But what do you think that was?
Well, a lot of them in that case it's not just what they do, but obviously who they are. Those are incredible, inspirational leaders of people, and they haven't just facilitated and achieved performance, they've sustained it over ridiculously long periods of time. And I think we can all look at them and just in awe listen to them. I think what they do, though, they're all pretty extreme conviction. But also the things that they have conviction around, I think, are very, very fundamental and basic. Because a bit like parenting, when the kids might ask the mum for a biscuit and the mum says no, and then they'll ask the dad for a biscuit and dad says yes. People are always testing leaders to whether or not they actually believe their own stories, and those people really did believe their own stories. No doubt, and nothing is bigger. That famous story about Beckham in the changing room in the football boot, nothing is bigger than the goal that we're all working towards, And so what occurred to me when I was doing my QBRs and kickoffs, I realized, you're trying to rah-rah the team the whole time. I realized I was basically always saying the same thing. And I thought I need to distill this down into a model that we can kind of put on the wall, a little bit like maybe sports teams will put on the wall, or a methodology that we can establish as like a Rosetta Stone for how we behave. And just as an example, like David Brailsford did that 2012 Olympics and the Sky Cycling team, his whole thing around the aggregation of marginal gains. And that's nothing new. I mean, American Airlines is famous for saving millions of dollars by removing olives from the salad. But what that is really all about is, again, like a maniacal pursuit of just trying to make everything a tiny bit better all the time. And actually, that's not just about compounding gains. It's actually about a mindset of not being defensive whenever someone suggests that a gain is possible. And so if you sort of combine, and in that case, if you combine sort of urgency and that sort of maniacal pursuit of staying within boundaries and being efficient with aggregation of marginal gains times by the whole of the team, like, you can see straight away that's massive, right? So I think the point is, and something I worked with my sales leaders on, external mentors, and through several iterations, polish, we basically came up with a model that was like a growth framework that we could pen on the wall, that managers could use to kind of ground all of the things that they were trying to achieve, to say this is the sort of the higher level picture of all the principles and the standards that we're holding ourselves to as a company, not just sales, to achieve growth. And it's quite a hard thing to do, and every company's going to, and every individual's going to have their own flavor of it. But I'd sort of encourage business leaders to try and do that. Otherwise, you are just repeating yourself. And also, you don't just want to keep borrowing from Alex Ferguson and David Brailsford. You want your own flavor of that, and you ultimately want to make it yours. But the application of it comes down to whether or not you truly live by it and believe it. Because if you don't, the team will see that, and then it's dead. Yeah.
Let's go on to the sort of AI agentic stuff. Yeah, clearly you're like right in the bleeding edge of that at the moment with Luminance. We were chatting. I mean, it's just amazing pace that you guys are innovating at. So exciting to see. Like, if we talk about agentic systems, so like as agentic systems begin executing workflows autonomously, how will that change how software delivers value to customers?
Okay, so I think we're in a phase right now. If you've sort of studied automation at all, and I've spent a bit of time doing this over the years, what's happening now is there's debate about whether or not this is unique. What my take is, everything is unique when you're in it right now, and it's different from the past. But to me, I actually think it is all the same. When the Jacquard loom was invented in the early 1800s, there were protests for decades about that, and people losing their jobs and so on. Kind of looks the same now. In fact, that was probably more extreme. So what's happening is we're now seeing automation come into white-collar jobs, and that's why there's a whole other sort of cohort of people that are concerned about this, and I totally understand that. And so we have to just sort of dissect the hype and dissect the emotion and just sort of get real as to what this means. And so firstly, there's a difference between AI that can be used to give us all a little bit of a productivity nudge. Great. We're all using the language models. There are wrappers that surround those models that businesses can subscribe to so that individuals can get a bit more kind of domain usability, maybe accounting, legal, marketing. And that is using AI to make the individual a little bit more productive. Great. But that's not what the promise of AI is, because that's a human interface with AI. The real promise is a machine interface with AI, where we start getting enterprise-wide benefit from this technology. In other words, workflows and operations and pre-existing silos are going to be completely redrawn and redefined by agents. And the first thing is to know the difference between technology that's hyped to be this transformational enterprise tech, but actually it's just something designed to make your individual work life a little bit better, which is very appealing because everyone wants to use AI. People are fearful. They need to tell their boss they're using AI. And so those are tools that are very easy to adopt, but they're easy to turn on and they're easy to turn off because they don't generate enterprise-wide value, which we are working towards. So when we think about real impact of AI, business level impact, we do need to talk about this fear thing, and we need to talk about KPIs. So it's true that people are fearful from their jobs. This thing is scary. What's it going to do to me? But what's also true is that leaders of businesses have a responsibility to be more efficient over time, not waste resources, not waste money. And what's also true is in just about every domain, there are very, very obvious tasks that highly skilled people did not go to university or business school to do. And in the legal world, and a good example of that is like NDAs. Every business needs an NDA, but these highly trained, highly skilled, intelligent people didn't go through law school to negotiate NDAs. And if you speak to them about that and say, I know it's scary, but managers want efficiency, but it is true, isn't it? This is not the work that you'd rather spend all day long doing. They go, yeah, that's right. And so that is the entry point then. So once we can get people comfortable with this idea that, look, we're looking to automate out elements of work that should just be done by machines anyway, which again is what automation's always been about. Now we can get people comfortable with embarking on these projects, and the next thing is KPIs. And the thing about KPIs is to have KPIs that are designed to make these automation projects succeed rather than fail. And the analogy I always use is if I'm a welder and I'm in a factory and I've been told by my boss to set up some robots to weld cars. If I say, the amount of time it's taken me to set up this robot, I could have welded a car by now, then the KPIs are wrong. Because the point is, no, we are going to be setting up robots because we're going from 2 to 2,000 cars a day. I think this will happen, and it will happen in stages. I don't believe the hype. It was only a couple of years ago, you could still find large enterprises that didn't have their data in the cloud and people that use Lotus Notes for email. My experience over 30 years is that these changes actually happen very slowly. In terms of adoption. And I think that is going to give us time to see the difference between individual productivity gains versus enterprise-wide benefit. And it's going to give us time to start biting off those chunks and get comfortable with biting off the chunks of work that humans should be doing anyway.
We're seeing rapid growth in the vertical AI companies focused on specific industries. Why do you think this model is gaining traction?
So in the middle of all this, if you like, are the generalist large language model developers. And I think of that as those as being like raw materials. Sam Altman describes them as being like utilities. He talks about their business model being renting intelligence. And I think that's right. It's a raw material. But the cost of running those companies is so vast. The expectations and valuations are so massive that they need to be generating more revenue faster than they are now. And so what they do is that they're helping people figure out where this raw material can be used. And they're doing that by putting kind of widgets together. So I can imagine they have meetings where they say, look, team, we need to show these people, show the world how this raw material can be used. So spin up a widget for marketing, for legal, for accounting, for whatever. And And that creates a stir in the market where everyone says, oh, hang on, somebody from OpenAI has just gone and disrupted the whole industry. It's like, no, they haven't. They've just kind of given an indication of how this raw material might be used for a very small, these are like indicative examples. So to your point about sort of domain AI, so what's happened around that then is there's now then a deeper level of domain attention. So there are wrappers that have built UIs on top of these generalist models that provide even more domain-specific usability to that generalist model. So you'll find wrappers for legal, wrappers for coding, wrappers for marketing, wrappers for writing copy and things like that. And they're effectively just user interfaces that mean, if I'm a copywriter or if I'm a lawyer, I've now got an even easier, more intuitive interface with some logic in it to help me get value from the generalist model. But these businesses are, again, they are all in the business of providing productivity enhancements to an individual. None of that so far is an enterprise-wide impact, and it is not a machine interface with AI. And back to the kind of raw material analogy, it's a bit like the LLM providers have just invented this thing that is sand, and they've shown that you can do something with it by making it into a sandcastle. The wrappers are like bigger sandcastles, but none of them are turning it into glass. So to turn sand into glass, you need some pretty heavy-duty machinery and processes. And so now there's a whole bunch of companies that are looking to make glass out of the sand. And that's why, in my opinion, the SaaS apocalypse is kind of ridiculous, because the businesses that are going to turn the sand into glass are the ones that have the really deep enterprise expertise. And even though the architecture is going to require an overhaul, even though the pricing models are going to change, that will happen. But it's domain expertise ultimately that is going to put the raw material to work. So
last question, how should revenue leaders think about selling AI products differently from traditional SaaS?
Yeah, so the key word to bear in mind is agent. Yeah. These are now machines that are doing the work of people. And when we think about that, we're not just talking about features, functions, data retrieval. We are talking about workflows. We're talking about work. We're talking about decisions. We're talking about actions that are now being taken, made, executed by machines. So effectively, this is one great big quality control project. So if you want to think you can get a machine to do something, you have to calibrate it to the point where it's good enough to do it. We're sort of all in a world right now where technology vendors are creating sort of partial autonomy products with like a metaphorical autonomy slider. And I'm stealing that quote from a YouTube video I saw from the former head of AI of Tesla. And he's quite right. Effectively, we are helping businesses move that metaphorical autonomy slider to help companies understand when the agents are sufficiently calibrated that they can trust them enough to automate processes. So human in the loop is really important, because human in the loop is part of that quality control process. The sort of back to, again, using my manufacturing days, when you can get a machine to produce things at very, very high volumes and there are no longer any errors because you've done extensive process control on them, you deem that process to be within control, and now you can automate. It's the same now. So let's just say, back to the NDA negotiation example, if we've got agents negotiating NDAs between parties, if the outcomes suggested by the agents have not been altered by a human in 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 iterations, at some point a business is going to say, that's good enough to just let it run. And so we're in a period now of deciding what good enough means for each application of an agent.
Amazing. That brings us to the end of the sort of the questions, but we always finish these pods with a little bit of fun. So we've got some quick fire questions just to kind of get to know you a little bit better. So first question, don't think about it too much. Favorite piece of tech or app you are using now? Is this all personal?
Yeah, I mean, it's just got to be, it's got to be the models. I mean, I'm a big Gemini fan because I love the way Google sort of thinks about its models as being a tool rather than a religion, like some of the others. But everything from sort of family financial planning to at Luminance, I negotiated my contract using Gemini. I had a flight cancelled to the States last week. It routed me through Washington, D.C., and Gemini told me which gate I was going to be arriving at and how long it would take me to go through immigration and make the change, and it navigated it all for me. It's just as a sort of assistant to make the business of life faster. I think it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? Yeah. What keeps you up at night?
Well, hopefully nothing, because I try and pay attention to my sleep. No, but seriously, sleep is something that we can all pay a lot more attention to. And when we live sort of when we're working in intense places. I tend to wake up at night because I've got an idea in my head about work and I'm excited about it. I get excited about trying to go faster, and then I have to calm myself down. And this is not for now. This is for later. So no, it's sort of excitement about the things that I could be doing that keeps me up at night. But I'm going to work really hard to not wake up at night.
Night at the disco, night at the restaurant.
Disco
every time. Yeah. Favorite food.
Pie.
Okay.
Yeah, like I was out last night. Had a really nice chicken and leek pie and mash. Definitely.
Hearty. Favorite movie.
Godfather, of course.
If you were to describe yourself in 2 words, what would it be and why?
In 2 words, highly persistent. And why? Because it tends to pay off, but it can be problematic because eventually you need to back off.
Can you tell me a little bit about your proudest moment in your career to date?
Yes, probably surviving through to IPO. It was so much work, and everyone always sees the glory of the photos and the standing on stage at the NASDAQ, which is the most amazing experience. And it's so emotional because you just can't believe you actually got there, and it feels so good when you do it. Of course, the IPO is actually the beginning, not the end. But I suppose it just makes me proud because it's difficult for everybody, and even though there's a lot of friction and tension and stress and just the interpersonal kind of journey you have to go through with a lot of people to do that is massive. It's so difficult. But when you get there, you think, wow, we actually did that. It is. It's a really emotional thing.
I bet. If you have anything, have you got any guilty pleasures?
Trashy films. I want to sit down and watch a film that I don't have to think about.
Yeah. Easy watching. That's been brilliant, Dan. Thanks very much for joining us. Got so much interesting sort of content from that and great answers as expected. Loved having you on. If anybody wants to sort of get in touch with you guys at Luminance, heard stuff they're interested in, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I don't check the inbox every day, but that's where people can find me.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks again.
Thanks, Simon.